Okay, here we go. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Shavuos Daf Yud Beis. And we're starting about 2/3 of the way down on Yud Aleph Amud Beis. We'll be going toward the bottom of Yud Beis Amud Beis for today. Let's jump right in. Says the Gemara, Omar Mar, again, 2/3 of the way down. My first word on the line is Hoel. The Gemara says, Omar Mar, we learned in regards to the Para Aduma that Mesa Tifte, that if the animal dies, it can be redeemed. If a Para Aduma dies, it can be redeemed. Asks the Gemara, what are you going to do with a dead Para Aduma? It's not edible. It's a nevela. You're not allowed to eat animals that die naturally. You can only eat animals that are shechted properly. So what are you going to do? Feed it to the animals? Bishum ora. No, we're allowed to be podeh in order to capture and save the skins of the animal. That's not cheap. All of our tefillin are made out of that, and all of our a lot of our clothes are made out of that. A lot of our shoes, belts, everything else. So it says the Gemara, "B'kaimi bezdin umasno adaita de ora." The Chachamim came up with some kind of din in order for us to be able to save the hide of the animal. I've been in people's homes where they have a cowhide as their carpet. It's not exactly chashuv. And here the Gemara is lav dafka talking about halachic things. It's just saying that you're allowed to save the ora. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Kahana, Amre Inshi, people say, Migamla ona. From a camel, you can get a whole camel just for its ear. Again, I think it's just a turn of phrase to say that even for the small parts of the animal, you can get the animal itself. So too, by para aduma, you're allowed to go and be podeh that animal, even if it's mesa, even if you can't eat it and otherwise benefit from its body, because you can still sell the ora. Esvei, the Gemara says, Amru lo Reb Shimon. Now, again, after the context of yesterday's Gemara, one of the things that we're going to see is that we're now connecting back to our Mishnah. Amar lo Reb Shimon. Amru lo Reb Shimon. Mao sheyikruvu zebazeh. This was in our Mishnah on Daf Beis. Says the Gemara, what's the deal with one shiur being used for another shiur? The shiur Rosh Chodesh, for the shiur Regalim. Are we allowed to be interchangeable in regards to that? So says the Gemara, Amar lahu, Reb Shimon says back to the Chachamim, Yikrivu. Now you're allowed to take one shiur, let's say the shiur Rosh Chodesh, and use it for the shiur Regal. Says the Gemara, Amru lo, hol ve'en kaparos and shave, hey chen krevit. I don't understand. The korban, we spoke about this the other day, the korban for Rosh Chodesh has one chop. The korban for the Regalim has another. So how can you, Reb Shimon, say that yikrivu, that you can take one and bring it for the other, take the korban Rosh Chodesh and bring it for the Seirei Regalim? How can you do that? Amar lehen kulan bain l'chaper al tumas mikdash v'kadasho. Really, says the Gemara, all of the korbanos have a similar theme. The tzad hashava shebehen is that they're mechaper on tumas mikdash v'kadasho. Now here's our question. Now you'll recall that yesterday we learned this principle that leiv bezdin masne alehem. Says the Gemara, ve'amai. Why do you have to say that the reason why you can bring a Seir Rosh Chodesh for a regel, why do you have to come to this odd answer that they all have the same function? Just say, Ve'amai, say leiv bezdin masnaleh. It just depends. Bezdin can determine. Again, we assert an assumption that Bezdin can choose. Okay, you brought this year of Rosh Chodesh. Now we don't need it for Rosh Chodesh anymore. Leiv Bezdin Masna, then you can use it. But Lav Dafka, that the Seir of Rosh Chodesh has the same kapara capabilities as the Seir for the Regel. It says the Gemara, must therefore be that Reb Shimon, that Reb Shimon doesn't hold of this. Says the Gemara, Reb Shimon Kamris. Of course, Pasha, that it's not going to be a problem for Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon Lesle, Lev Bezdin Masna Lem. We know that he doesn't hold that. How do we know that Reb Shimon doesn't hold of this presumption, this built-in assumption, I should say, that we are, if an animal is extra, we can then say, I know it used to be Kedushas Haguf, but now we can lower it because it's Kedushas Damim, because I need it. How do we know he doesn't hold of that? To Amar Rav Idi Bar Avin, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Yochanan, Timidin shelo hutzerchul etzibor l'divrei Reb Shimon ein niftin tmimim. That's black on white, that he doesn't hold of this idea of leiv bezdin masnalim, because as you'll recall, yesterday on Yud Amud Beis, where we started yesterday, and we spoke about Ula's din, that if you have a korban tummy that's no longer necessary, and it's for the tzibor, then you can be podeh the animal without a mum. Here we see quite clearly that Reb Shimon does not hold that way, and l'divrei chachamim niftin tmimim. But according to the chachamim taka, like we saw yesterday, in the name of Ula, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, you are allowed to be podeh, the animal of, let's say, a tamid that is no longer needed. You are allowed to be podeh that even without a mum. Now, this sheet of the chachamim v'rabbanan de palig de Reb Shimon man ninhu. What kind of source do they have that says that they're right? If you want to say that the Rabbanon who disagree with Reb Shimon and hold that leiv bezdin masna aleim, and really we do assert the assumption that if you no longer need that kachim, it lowers its status down to kedushas damim, and therefore it can be podeh. If you want to say it's from the Ktores, turning to the top of Yud Beis Medav, shiny Ktores, the lo bar reiyahi, it doesn't get bad. It doesn't turn sour because it's just spices. So it says on the side over here, the low bas, a little bit of a small change, the low bas, it doesn't get bad. And Ella, what then is the source? Again, we have a machlokes tanoim seemingly about whether or not we say leiv bezin masne aleim. So it says the Gemara, according to the Rabbanan, we still need a source. We tried Ktores and we failed. Let's try source number 2. Ella Rabbanan de para. Maybe you want to talk about the fact that we allow for a para to be redeemed. That was the last din we learned yesterday, the first din we learned today. That a para aduma can be redeemed if you find a better one. That was a brisa toward the top of Yud Aleph Amud Beis 10 lines down, where it says, Matza acheres na'ehimena tipadeh. Now, there was nothing wrong with the first para, yet we still allowed to swap out for what would be a higher quality para. So perhaps that's where we see that the Rabbanon allow for leiv bezin masna aleim, because they put in this. How can you say that the para aduma now we can just redeem it without a mum, just because you found a better one? Elamai, it must be leiv bezin masna. Maybe that's the sheet of the chachamim. Says the Gemara, no, the chachamim, you can't use that source of para aduma for the chachamim. Second line, because dilma shani para the dameha yukarin. Maybe the rules change with the para aduma. It's supply and demand. How many para adumas do we have? Very, very few. And because there are very few, so maybe the rules are different. Maybe the chachamim will be more lenient in this regard and not require the blemish to take place before the para aduma is going to be nifta. So again, we still don't have a source in order to support the sheet of the Rabbanan, and that's in the Tanaim side. But yesterday, that was also the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan. So on the third line of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, "Ve'ela Rabbanan de Amrulo." Perhaps it's the Rabbanan of the brisa that we started with, which was 10, 12 lines from the bottom. Remember, they said to Rabbi Shimon, the Chachamim said, Amrulo mayin sheyikru zeh bazeh. And then he said back to them, yeah, you're allowed to be makri of, let's say, the shiur of the Rosh Chodesh for the shiur of the regalim. And then they said to him, I don't understand, ein kaparas and shaveh. And then he said, no, really, Reb Shimon said, really, kulan bain l'chaper al tumas mikdash v'kadasha. So perhaps that's the shita where we see they push against Reb Shimon. Well, Rabbanan de Amrulo, maybe it's the rabbis of, quote, de Amrulo, the ones who push back against Reb Shimon in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, mimaid Reb Yehudahi. How do we know that this is Reb Yehudahi? And Rashi fills in the gaps here. Rashi, third line down, Dibur Hamaschal mimaid Reb Yehudahi. Mimaid Reb Yehuda ka'amar le de islay nami ein kaparas and shaveh. Maybe. How do we know that it's Rav Yehuda who holds that? Kirib Shimon. Umishum leiv bezdin masnehu de kamosiv lav hachi kamar lahu. And what would be the argument back in the Gemara that bishlama ledidi? I agree, according to my perspective, that perhaps Reb Shimon Taka does hold that the Chachamim Taka do hold of Yikruvu. But according to you, Reb Shimon, who you clearly don't hold of this, then how can you say that? Dilma, perhaps it's not Reb Yehuda. Perhaps the Baal Plugta of Reb Shimon in our Mishnah is not Reb Yehuda, but Dilma Reb Meir he, the Hachi Kamerle. And this is what Reb Meir is saying. Remember, there was a three-way machlokes in our Mishnah. Bishlama ledidi, says Reb Meir, Da'amina kol asim kaparos and shabbat mishum hachi yikruvu. Reb Meir says to Reb Yehuda, Reb Meir says to Reb Shimon in our Mishnah, I know why I say that it should be yikruvu. Ela ledidcha, ma yikruvu. According to you who don't say that all the siyam are kaparos and shabbat, why would you allow it? So therefore, we still don't have a source to support the sheet of the Rabbanon that leiv bezdin masna leim. And the Gemara concludes with a bit of a shocking answer because we have no real Mari Makomos around it. Says the Gemara, El Rav Yochanan Gemara Gamir La. He has a tradition. He has a Masorah. He heard this from his Rebbe, and that's why. What did he hear? L'divrei Reb Shimon ein niftin, that you're not allowed to be podeh without a blemish, and l'divrei Chachamim niftin. Very good. So that's not a stark answer, but it's an answer nevertheless. So now, if we were to summarize the last many lines, what's the Mare Makom to teach us that the Rabbanon hold that ain bezdin leid bezdin mastin alehem, that we don't have this presumption of the assumption of Chazal? Says the Gemara, other than to tell you that Rabbi Yochanan learned it in shiur, I don't have anything else to tell you. So that's what the Gemara accepts. Now the Gemara asks a practical question, and we're about 10, 12 lines down on Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Ula Reb Shimon de les le bezin masnelen. According to Reb Shimon, who doesn't hold of le bezin masnelehem. So Taka, what does he do? My avdin lahu, if there are extra korban tamid. Let's say that the only korban tamid that he has left is from last year. You can't use it for this year. So according to that, what would he do with that animal? So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yochanan, mekitzin bahenes hamizbeach. We keep it on the mizbeach as an extra. So what is this talking about? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is 8 lines down. Dibur hamaschil mekitzin bahenes hamizbeach. What do we do, according to Reb Shimon, with this extra korban tamid from last year, which can't be used, previous fiscal year? Says Rashi, k'shamizbeach batel makriven oso ola linidvas tzibor. And Rashi goes on to explain a whole host of things. But one of the things that comes up over here is we don't want the mizbeach to be batel. So if there's a time when no one's bringing a mizbeach, there's no chatas coming in, there's no animals over yored, all the korbanos that were typically brought. So then we have a din that mekitzin behind the mizbeach. We have to keep the mizbeach busy, and we're going to learn a little bit more about this on the bottom line of this page. Next, Amar Reb Shmuel bar Reb Yitzchak. Umode Reb Shimon b'seirei chatas she'ein mekitzin begufan el b'dmei. You're correct. If we have an extra korban tamid, you're right. We would use it for mekitzin for kitzin on the mizbeach. That's fine. But with seirei chatas, not a tamid, but with a chatas ein mekitzin begufan, you're not allowed to use the actual animal of a chatas that is no longer needed. Ella, we would then sell that animal, bidmehen, buy another animal, and use those new dollars and those new animals for the mekitzin ala mizbeach. Because hacha, by the korban tamid, hu demei ikara ole behashta ola. The chatas is part of the ola world. And because that's true, no, it's all the same. If it was a chatas before, now, okay, we're not using it, so then fine, we'll put it on the mizbeach for mekitzin as mizbeach. Aval hasam, but in a case where the animal was a seirei chatas, there we have a restriction from Chazal that we cannot use for mekitzin ala mizbeach. Why? Aval hasam, if it were to have been a chatas, aval hasam dmei ikara chatas v'hashta ola, but now that we're changing over this chatas into an ola, gzeira la'achar kapara, we're afraid that you'll make a mistake with a chatas and bring it at the wrong time, and we do not want that happening. And we're going to bring 3 proofs to this idea that a chatas cannot be brought out of sequence, and therefore we have this rule that when we are using an extra seir chatas, that we have to make sure we cash it out first and don't use that actual animal. Amar Abaye, here's proof number 1, almost halfway down on Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Afananami Tanina. We have this idea, and this was found just a blot ago. Par v'sar Shema Kippurim sha'avdu. Let's say that I separated a cow and the korban musaf for Yom Kippur, and it got lost. And then v'hifer shacherem tachteim. And then I got another par and sa'ir. And similarly, seirei avodah zara sha'avdo v'hifer shacherem tachteim. Somebody had set aside the korban sa'ir for accidentally having done avodah zara. Says the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, Kulan Yamusu, all of them have to die, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's not the shita we need to worry about. But in this brisa, what do we see? Let's continue. Rebbe Lazar, Reb Shimon Omrim, Yiru ad sheyista'avu. They have to graze until they develop some type of mum. V'yimkaru, v'yiplu d'mein l'nadava. And here what do we see? That then they get sold, and the money goes to a nadava. Why do we have to wait? Says Rebbe Lazar and Reb Shimon, she'ein chatas tzibor mesa. We never leave it to die. Ve'amai nikravu inhu gufai ola. Why don't we just take that chatas and use it for the mekitzin al mizbeach? Must be kapara. Same principle that we learned earlier in the name of Reb Shmuel bar Reb Yitzchak that we saw a third of the way down, that we are concerned that if the chatas turns to an ola, that someone might bring that chatas at the wrong time. And similarly, proof number 2, Amar Rava Afan Anami Tanina Nachabraisa that we had in Maseches Yuma, and we'll soon see in Tamura. Not so soon, but in about a year and a half. The Hasheni, what is this talking about? The Hasheni, we're talking about the Seir LaAzazel. We know, of course, that there were 2 Seirim that were separated, the Seir LaHashem and the Seir LaAzazel. The Hasheni, if something happened to the Seir LaAzazel, so the problem is that the Seir LaHashem and the Seir LaAzazel are a package deal. If one of them goes bad, we can't use the other one. So then, v'hasheni, if there's a problem with the second one, then we have to make sure that both of them, even the Seir LaHashem, which is perfect, it has to wait till it's yistayv, it has to wait till it develops a mum, and then we sell it. V'amai, why would you say that? Take the Seir LaHashem that's in perfect shape and yikarev ihu gufeola. Why don't we do that? Elalav, it must be that because the Brisa doesn't recommend that. Elalav, Shma Mina, like the Shita we saw earlier, a third of the way down, in the name of Rav Yitzchak, Rav Yochanan, in the name of Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, that Seirei Chatas are not mekitzin begufan ela b'dmei and Shma Mina gzera achar kapara atu lifnei kapara. And the third raya, and we're 7 or 8 lines from the bottom of the page, Amar Ravina afana nami tanina nacharaya. This can be found in Maseches Tmura as well, and it was also quoted in passing in Psachim. Asham shemesu ba'alav. If there's a korban asham that needs to be brought, but their bailim died, shenis kapru bailav, or there was kapara found in another way. Yirad shistabe macharib l'nadava. Rabbi Lazar Omer Yamos. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Yabe b'dam of Ola. Says the Gemara, according to some of these shitas, why didn't we just recommend Vili Karv Hagufa Ola? Why don't we take the Asham, which is in the Chatas category, and bring it as an Ola? Why didn't we do that? Elalav. And here we have the final and third proof, Elalav, Gzeira, La'achar Kapara Atu Lifnei Kapara Shma Mina. And this is a slam dunk clear case that yes, it's true that if we have an extra Tamid, which is an Ola, that can be put as Mekitzin Al Mizbech. But if you have a Chatas, and you're switching the chatas to an ola, so then it has to go through this transition of waiting for it to get a mum, then we cash it out, and we get the $500 for the cow, then we buy a nacha cow, and then we put that up for mekitzah. That's fine. But we would not allow for a chatas to be put up as an ola out of concern that one would learn the wrong thing about timing with a chatas. Tanya Nami Hachi, and this Tanya Nami Hachi is actually a little bit out of place. And if you look at Rashi, Rashi beautifully helps us to know what we're talking. I would have thought that Tanya Nami Hachi was another raya for this idea. It's not true, says Rashi. Kida Amar Le'el Mosaros L'Reb Shimon Mekitzin Bena Esamizbech, going back up to a third of the page down. The raya for the Shita Rav Yitzchak Amar Rav Yochanan, how do we know that he's right, that we have these extra korbanos on the Mizbeach, bottom line of Yud Beis and Aleph? Says the Gemara, Mahen Mevian Min HaMosaros, what would they bring from the extras? Rashi says, Mahin Mevian Min HaMosaros Shel Tzibor Shenisosru Mishana L'Shana, the ones from last year that we can no longer bring, and now they're being put on the Mizbech. Turning to the top of Yud Beis and Yud Beis, says the Gemara, Kayetz, it's extras, and they get put on the Mizbech, Kibnos Shuach LeMizbech, just like figs are put on the Mizbech. Just like figs are put on the Mizbech. Says the Gemara, Vaksiv Kicholsa or V'chol Devash. Lo saktir mimena. You can't put things up there that are super sweet. That's not how it works. Says the Gemara, Tani Reb Chanina, don't worry. Kibno shuach le'adam. Just like we have dessert, we have the sweets at dessert. You bring out the figs, you bring out the dates, all the shivas aminim. You love all the desserts. They're gevaldik. So says the Gemara, the Mizbech also has dessert, and that dessert is like an extra korban. What korban is it? It's the extra tamidim from last year, and that's what the Gemara says. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda, Yud Beis and Yud Beis, 3 lines down. Ein mekitzin be'ola sa'of. Oh, so while it's true that you can use one ola, that's an animal, a chaya, behema, whatever, you can use them as let's say that you have an extra tamid, the tamid can go on. But if it's an ola of a bird, that does not go on. Amar Rava, ha burcha. Ha burcha, says the Gemara, this is a nothing. You made this up. This is not accurate. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak the Rabba, my burchasa, why are you saying that this is a nothing? Ona amrisa nehale, umishmei de Rav simi minahar da amrisa nehale, da Rav simi minahar da mosar stana dava sibur azli, ve'ein olas of betzibur. What are you talking about? I have a beautiful marimako. Stop saying I don't know what I'm talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And that seems to be the same exact thing. Ve'af Shmuel savar la lahad de Rav Yochanan, and it seems to be that he holds like Rav Yochanan as well. And if you take a look at Rashi, 10 lines down, Lahadr of Yochanan Damar Leil Tmidin Shlohutzur Rav Shimon, the less lebezin masna makitzin behenes hamizbech begufan vein tzrichin raya, that we are allowed to be makitz on the mizbech. How do we know this? Damar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel korbanos tzibur. When there's a korban tzibur, sakin moshchas on the mashahin. When you use the sakin, namely at the time of the shchita, that determines the status of that animal. So that means, and we'll see in this brisa, beautiful raya, that what happens at the moment of shchita is what determines the status. If there's a seir, she'im lo kara beregel, yikra b'rosh chodesh. Why? Why is that allowed? Because afal pi that it's true that it was meant for the regel, but the sakin is moshchas on the mashahen. So therefore, yikra b'rosh chodesh. V'im la kar b'rosh chodesh, yikra b'yom kippurim. V'im lo kar b'yom kippurim, yikar b'regel. V'im lo kar b'regel zen, yikar b'regel acher. It really was just meant to be a kapar in the outer chitzon. And again, this ties into some of the shitas in our Mishnah. Is it kaparos and shaveh? You could connect these to a lot of different shitas, but so says the Gemara. And that brings us to the two dots, almost halfway down on Yud Beis. And Beis, we're going to be going in Mir Hashem until about 5 lines before the bottom of the page. And then we will pause for the night. Skipping the parentheses, how do we know that this din is true? The Tanu Rabbanon, v'chiper al hakodesh mitumos b'nei Yisrael, and it's a little bit of a strange place to stop the pasuk because the next word is umi pishehem, and what we're trying to do is prove the din of pesha. Says the Gemara, pshaim elu hamaradim. When the pasuk says pishehem, that's talking about the maradim, the people who are rebellious. Afal pikein, the korbanos on Yom Kippur are strong enough. Ve'al zidon tumas mikdash v'kadashav sir nasa bifnim, the sir Lashem covers. V'chein hu omer melech moav pesha bi okay. V'omer v'az tifsha, says the Gemara, v'az tifsha livna be'esahi, another riot for the use of the word pesha, that it's a merida. What about chatos? What about when the pasuk says chatosam? Again, the same pasuk that quotes me pisheim, it says v'chiper ala kodesh mitumos b'nei Yisrael mipishem l'chol chatosam. So what does it mean chatos? Elu hashagagos. So there you get covered for the shagaga if you do an accidental isser, so you'll get covered. V'cheinu omer nefesh kisechet habishgaga, that the korban seir Lashem on Yom Kippur is mechaper for a whole bunch of things. It's mechaper even for a mezid and certainly for a chatas. And the last little sugya for tonight, al sha'ar averos shebetorah hakalos ve'chalmuros hazadonos ve'ashagagos. And the Gemara is bothered by what seems to be some duplicative language in our Mishnah. Hainu kalos. When we say the kalos, what are we talking about? Hainu aseh velos aseh. These are your regular isurim in the Torah. Shatnez, the regular stuff. Chamuros hainu krisos u'misos bezdin. So when you say chamuros, I already know you mean krisos u'misos bezdin. Hoda hainu mezid. Again, duplicative. And lo hoda hainu shogeg. So again, all the language is very duplicative. So the Gemara says that's not correct. Amar of Yehuda, Hachika Amar. This is the right way to look at it. Al Sha'ar Averos Shebetorah Bein Kalos Bein Chamuros. For the rest of the Averos that are in the Torah, whether or not they're Kal or Chamur, Bein Sha'asan B'Shogeg, Bein Sha'asan B'Mezid, whether or not you did them. This is a better way to read our Mishnah. It's whether or not. Instead of just saying Shogeg, Mez, and Kalos, we're giving a taich. And Osan Sha'asan B'Shogeg, even if you did something B'Shogeg, again, with a greater depth. Bein Noda Lo Sveikan, Bein Lo Noda Lo Sveikan. Veilu Hein HaKalos, Aseh V'Lo Saseh. We're giving Pshat. Veilu Hein Chamuros, Krisos and Misos Bezdin. Instead of saying it's a laundry list, one thing explains another. And that's why at the end of our Mishnah, at the very beginning of this Masechta on Daf Beis, and this really was toward the end of the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Beis and Beis, it brought us to that point where we were able to see that there was nothing extra in that Mishnah. We'll stop right here, 5 lines from the bottom of the page at high, and we'll pick up Emir Tashem from here tomorrow night. I will not be here Thursday night, but I've already asked Rabbi Handler to cover, and he will be subbing for me. Next week on Tuesday, I will not be here. And Wednesday, Mir Hashem, is a wedding. I don't know what my schedule will be for that, but we'll clarify when we get closer. We'll pause right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.